question is simple. Was the Notorious B.I.G.'s murder a revenge killing? Was it a direct response to the murder of Tupac Shakur 6 months earlier? The simple answer is yes. That's what most people believe. It's the story that makes the most sense. It's clean. It has a dark, tragic symmetry. The king of the West Coast is killed, so the king of the East Coast must die. An eye for an eye. A rapper for a rapper. It fits the narrative of the East Coast versus West Coast war perfectly. But the truth is never that simple. The story of Christopher Wallace's death on March 9th, 1997 is a tangled mess of music, money, ego, and street violence. To call it just a revenge killing might be accurate, but it might also be too easy. It ignores the details, the other theories, the deep-seated corruption, and the possibility that the whole coastal war was a convenient smokescreen for something much uglier and more personal. To understand why Biggie was killed, you have to go back. You have to understand the world he lived in. You have to understand, the beef. It didn't start as a beef. In the early 90s, hip-hop felt like a unified culture. Not a rapper from New York could tour in Los Angeles and get love. Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg were friends with guys from the Wu-Tang Clan. Tupac Shakur and the Notorious B.I.G. were friends. Real friends. Tupac, already a star, took Biggie under his wing. He'd let Biggie crash at his place in California. He'd give him advice. There are photos of them together, laughing, sharing a stage. They were two of the most talented MCs of their generation, and they respected each other. The breaking point was November 30th, 1994. Tupac was in New York to record a verse. He went to Quad Studios in Manhattan. Biggie and his crew, Junior MAFIA, were upstairs in another studio session with Sean Puffy Combs, the head of Bad Boy Records. As Tupac entered the lobby, he was ambushed by two men. They shot him 5 times and stole his jewelry. Miraculously, he survived. He took the elevator upstairs, bleeding, and confronted Biggie and Puffy's crew. This is where the stories diverge. Biggie and Puffy said they were shocked. They said they had no idea what happened. They claimed they showed concern for Tupac. But Tupac didn't see it that way. He felt their reaction was too calm, too nonchalant. He believed they knew who did it. He started to believe they set him up. In his mind, it was a setup. Why else would his so-called friends be there acting so strange right after he gets shot in their building? From that moment on, the friendship was dead. While Tupac was in prison on an unrelated sexual assault charge, he stewed. He listened to the radio and heard Biggie's new song, Who Shot Ya? The song had been recorded before the shooting, but it was released afterward. The timing was terrible. To Tupac, it was a blatant taunt. Biggie was mocking him. He was dancing on the grave of their friendship. Biggie always maintained the song had nothing to do with Tupac. But it didn't matter. Perception became reality. When Tupac got out of prison, his bail was paid by Suge Knight, the CEO of Death Row Records. Death Row was the West Coast powerhouse. They had Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and now the most passionate and paranoid rapper on the planet. Suge Knight was a notorious and intimidating figure. He was a former football player with deep ties to the Mob Piru Bloods gang in Compton. He saw the conflict between Tupac and Bad Boy as a business opportunity. He poured gasoline on the fire. The war began in earnest. It was fought in interviews, on award show stages, and most importantly, on wax. Suge Knight stood on stage at the 1995 Source Awards in New York City with the entire Bad Boy camp in the audience and took a direct shot at Puffy. He basically said that artists who want to be stars shouldn't have their executive producer dancing in all their videos. The crowd booed. The line had been drawn. Then came the music. Tupac, now recording for Death Row, released the most vicious diss track in hip-hop history, Hit 'Em Up. It wasn't just a song, it was a declaration of war. He went after Biggie, Puffy, Junior MAFIA, and anyone associated with Bad Boy. He was merciless. He claimed he slept with Biggie's wife, Faith Evans. He threatened their lives. He made it clear this wasn't about record sales anymore, this was personal. This was street. The media ate it up. Magazines fanned the flames. The narrative was simple and exciting, East Coast versus West Coast. New York versus Los Angeles. Bad Boy versus Death Row. Biggie versus Tupac. It was a story as old as time, repackaged for the hip-hop generation. But for the people involved, it wasn't just a story. The threats felt real. The danger was real. Everyone had to pick a side. On September 7th, 1996, the war claimed its first icon. Tupac Shakur went to a Mike Tyson fight in Las Vegas with Suge Knight. After the fight, in the lobby of the MGM Grand, one of Tupac's associates spotted Orlando Babby Lane Anderson, a member of the Southside Compton Crips. The Crips and the Bloods, who Suge Knight was affiliated with, were bitter rivals. Anderson had allegedly been involved in robbing a Death Row affiliate a few weeks earlier. Tupac never wanted to back down through the first punch. Suge and the entire Death Row entourage jumped in, stomping and kicking Anderson on the casino floor. A couple of hours later, Tupac and Suge were stopped at a red light on the Las Vegas Strip. A white Cadillac pulled up alongside them. A gunman opened fire into the passenger side of their car. Suge was grazed by a bullet. Tupac was hit 4 times. He died in the hospital 6 days later. He was 25 years old. The world was in shock. Immediately, suspicion fell on the East Coast. The narrative was too obvious to ignore. The war had turned deadly. Many people, especially on the West Coast, believed Puffy and Biggie were behind it. They thought it was retaliation for hit 'em up and the constant threats. The FBI investigated the possibility. They looked into whether Bad Boy had hired the Crips to carry out the hit. No charges were ever filed. The case went cold, but the streets had their own form of justice. The word on the street was simple: Death Row was going to get revenge. Suge Knight was not the kind of man to let his star artist get murdered without a response. The target was obvious. There was only one person who could equal Tupac in stature. The Notorious B.I.G. Biggie was shaken by Tupac's death. He said he never wanted it to go that far. He said the beef was just on records, that it was never meant to be violent. He sounded tired of the war. He wanted peace. In early 1997, he decided to go to Los Angeles to promote his upcoming second album, a double-disc epic ironically titled Life After Death. His friends and family were terrified. They begged him not to go. Los Angeles was enemy territory. It was the home of Death Row Records. It was a city full of people who believed he had something to do with Tupac's murder. But Biggie insisted. He said he wasn't scared. He wanted to show everyone that he had no problem with the West Coast. He did radio interviews where he talked about squashing the beef. He wanted to move on. On the night of March 8th, 1997, Biggie attended the Soul Train Music Awards. After the ceremony, he went to a packed after-party hosted by Vibe magazine at the Peterson Automotive Museum. The party was a who's who of the music industry. It was also filled with tension. There were Bloods and Crips at the party, working security and just hanging around. Biggie's own security team was a mix of off-duty cops and Nation of Islam members. Around 12:30 a.m., the fire department shut the party down due to overcrowding. When Biggie and his entourage left, he was in the passenger seat of a green Chevy Suburban. Puffy was in the car ahead of him. They were part of a small convoy of vehicles. They stopped at a red light on the corner of Wilshire Boulevard and South Fairfax Avenue, just 50 yards from the museum. A dark Chevy Impala SS pulled up next to Biggie's truck. The driver, a black man in a suit and bow tie, rolled down his window. He looked at Biggie, he pulled out a 9mm pistol and fired multiple shots into the Suburban. 4 bullets hit Christopher Wallace. His security was in the car behind him, but it all happened too fast. The Impala sped off into the night. Biggie was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, the same hospital where Tupac was pronounced dead in some movies, though he actually died in Vegas. His doctors performed emergency surgery, but it was too late. The Notorious B.I.G. was pronounced dead at 1:15 a.m. on March 9th, 1997. He was 24 years old. His album Life After Death was released 16 days later and became a massive success. The murder looked like a professional hit. It was clean, quick, and public. And just like with Tupac's murder, the immediate assumption was retaliation. It was the next logical step in the East versus West war. Tupac was killed, now Biggie was killed. The score was settled. For many, the case was closed, emotionally if not legally. This was revenge, plain and simple. This is the most popular and enduring theory. It's the one at the heart of countless documentaries, books, and articles. The theory goes like this: Suge Knight, who was in prison at the time for a parole violation stemming from the casino fight, ordered the hit on Biggie from his jail cell. He wanted revenge for Tupac, his friend and his biggest asset. He used his connections to make it happen. The key figures in this theory were exposed by the work of journalist Randall Sullivan and former Laptey detective Russell Poole. Poole was the lead investigator on the murder of an off-duty police officer, Kevin Gaines, who was killed in a road rage incident. During that investigation, Poole discovered that Gaines was secretly working for Death Row Records and had ties to Suge Knight. This led him down a rabbit hole of police corruption. Poole came to believe that a whole network of Laptey officers was on Suge Knight's payroll. One of these officers was a man named David Mack. Mack was a decorated officer who was later arrested for a multi-million-dollar bank robbery. Poole found evidence that Mack was a close associate of Suge Knight. He also owned a black Chevy Impala SS, the same type of car used in Biggie's murder. According to Poole's theory, Suge Knight coordinated the hit through his girlfriend. She then contacted David Mack. Mack, in turn, hired a friend of his, a man named Amir Muhammad, also known as Harry Billups, to be the triggerman. Muhammad was a mortgage broker who resembled the police sketch of the shooter. Poole believed that members of the mob purebloods, loyal to Suge, helped corner Biggie's vehicle, allowing the shooter to get a clear shot. Poole presented his findings to the Laptey leadership. He believed he was on the verge of solving the case. but he claimed his superiors shut him down. They told him to stop pursuing the theory that active duty police officers were involved. They didn't want the scandal. They didn't want the world to know that lap-deed officers might be moonlighting as hitmen for a gangster rap label. Poole grew so frustrated with the stonewalling that he resigned from the force in protest. The Wallace family believed Poole. They filed a massive wrongful death lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles, claiming that corrupt lap-dead officers were responsible for the murder and that the department covered it up. The case went to trial, and it was a circus. Key documents were withheld by the lapdad. Witnesses changed their stories. The judge eventually declared a mistrial, ruling that the city had deliberately hidden evidence. The family later settled for a reported amount, but the core questions remained unanswered. The Poole-Sullivan theory is compelling. It connects all the major players: Suge Knight, death row, corrupt cops, and the motive of revenge. It explains the professionalism of the hit and the failure of the laptee to solve it. It paints a picture of a conspiracy that went all the way to the top of the department. For many, this is the definitive story of what happened. It confirms that Biggie's murder was, in fact, a revenge killing orchestrated by Tupac's mentor. But it's not the only theory. There are other investigators and journalists who believe the revenge motive is a red herring. They believe the East versus West war was the backdrop, but not the cause. Another prominent theory, pushed by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Chuck Phillips, points the finger in a different direction. Phillips' investigation suggested that Biggie's murder was not retaliation for Tupac's death, but rather the result of a financial dispute with the Compton Crips. The story goes like this. Puffy and Biggie, when they were in Los Angeles, needed security. They were on enemy turf and they knew it. They allegedly hired members of the Southside Compton Crips for protection during their trip. This would be the same Crip set that Orlando Anderson belonged to, the man who was beaten up by Tupac and Suge Knight's crew in Las Vegas. According to Phillips' sources, Bad Boy agreed to pay the Crips a certain amount of money for their services. But after the Soul Train party, there was a dispute over the payment. Biggie supposedly refused to pay the full amount. He felt they hadn't done their job properly, or that the price was too high. The Crips, feeling disrespected and cheated, decided to take matters into their own hands. In this version of events, the shooter wasn't a professional hitman hired by Suge Knight. It was a Crip, angry over a business deal gone wrong. The motive wasn't epic revenge for a fallen king. It was about money. A few $1,000s. This theory suggests that the murder of Tupac was a separate event carried out by Orlando Anderson and his fellow Crips as direct revenge for the casino beatdown, not as part of some grand East versus West plot. And Biggie's murder was also a self-contained event, stemming from a simple, deadly financial disagreement. This theory is less cinematic. It lacks the tragic poetry of the revenge narrative now. But in the world of street gangs and violence, disputes over money and respect are far more common motives for murder than intricate, cross-country conspiracies. It also helps explain why so many people were reluctant to talk. Snitching over a gang-related murder, especially one involving the biggest rapper in the world, would be a death sentence. So, where does that leave us? Was it a revenge killing? The answer is probably a mix of both. The East versus West war, fueled by Suge Knight and Puffy's egos and Tupac and Biggie's lyrical talent, created the toxic environment where these murders were not only possible, but almost inevitable. The beef blurred the lines between entertainment and reality. It took personal insults and broadcast them to millions of people. It made violence seem like a legitimate way to settle disputes. Whether Suge Knight directly ordered the hit or not, the desire for revenge was real. The entire death row camp was grieving and angry. The idea of retaliation was in the air. Biggie became the symbol of everything they hated about the East Coast and Bad Boy. He was the enemy. He was the target. That atmosphere of hatred and vengeance made him vulnerable. At the same time, the street-level dynamics cannot be ignored. The worlds of gangster rap and actual street gangs were deeply intertwined in the 90s. The artists employed gang members for security. They referenced gang life in their music. Sometimes those connections led to real-world consequences. It is entirely plausible that Biggie's death was the result of a mundane, stupid argument over money that escalated because of who he was and the violent world he was operating in. Perhaps the most accurate way to look at it is the revenge narrative is the why, and the gang dispute is the how. The overarching desire for revenge, for someone to pay for Tupac's death, set the stage. It put a target on Biggie's back the moment he landed in Los Angeles, The specific dispute with the Crips, if that theory is true, might have been the trigger. It provided the opportunity and the immediate motive for a specific group of people to act on the larger sentiment of vengeance that was already swirling around them. The Lap guy's role in all of this makes it even more complicated. The evidence of corruption, the covered-up files, and the resignation of a lead detective suggest that someone in a position of power did not want this case solved. Was it to protect corrupt officers like David Mack? Was it to avoid a massive scandal that would tarnish the department forever? Or was it something simpler? Was the case just too messy, too high profile, and too dangerous to solve? The official incompetence looks a lot like a deliberate cover-up. So, was Biggie's murder a revenge killing? Yes, in the grand sense, it was the climax of a war that had already claimed its other superstar. It was the tragic, predictable outcome of a feud that had spiraled out of control. The motive of revenge hangs over the entire event. It's the ghost in the machine. But was it a simple direct eye for an eye transaction ordered by Suge Knight? That part is much less certain. The reality is likely a muddier, more pathetic story. It's a story about corrupt cops, gang members, and a dispute over a few $1,000s, all happening under the giant shadow of the Tupac and Biggie beef. The revenge narrative is clean. The truth is almost certainly not. The murders of Tupac Shakur and the Notorious B.I.G. remain officially unsolved. The names of the triggermen are whispered, but have never been proven in a court of law. What we are left with is the story, and the most powerful story, the one that has stuck for over 2 decades, is one of revenge. It's a story of 2 brilliant young men, former friends turned bitter rivals, who were consumed by a culture of violence they helped create and popularize. In the end, it doesn't matter if it was Suge's revenge or a Crip's revenge. It was revenge, born from a conflict that should have stayed on wax, but instead spilled out into the real world with deadly consequences.